the sport of college football has had three things happen in the last, let's call it 6 weeks, each of which, on their own right, are the single biggest change that has ever befallen the sport, ever. First, they're going to go to 12 playoff teams. Don't let anyone tell you they're considering it. They're going. They're just figuring it out. So from a sport that, in recent memory, the champion was decided by writers, all of a sudden is going to go to a 12-team playoff format. That alone was the biggest change that had ever befallen the sport. Then name, image, and likeness came in, and all of a sudden, Bryce Young, the quarterback of Alabama, has 7-figure endorsement deals before he has even stepped foot on a playing field. That was the biggest change in the history of the sport. And now, Texas and Oklahoma are leaving the Big 12 and going to the SEC, which is going to set in motion a series of events, for certain, that are going to completely remake college sports as we know them. And we will live in a world no longer than 3 or 4 years from now, and maybe sooner than that, where there are 3 or 4, I say that again, 3 or 4 super conferences, and that's it. I believe the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are going to combine. They're going to merge. I think the ACC will grab Notre Dame and do anything they can to get them, and Notre Dame might ultimately figure out that they have no choice. And the SEC will, of course, continue to be the SEC. And everyone is going to be fighting to figure out where they land. All these schools in the Big 12 got to find a landing spot. Everyone's got to find a landing spot, but it won't be that hard to do because these conferences will have 20, 24 teams. That's what's coming. Each of these changes alone would be the biggest change that's ever befallen the sport. They're all happening at roughly the same time. So here's the question I'm sort of pondering today. I'm totally in favor of the players making their money, first and foremost. If you've listened to me for literally 30 years on the radio now, I've been saying that before it was even really a topic. So because it is the right thing to do, because it was just, in my opinion, completely immoral for the athletes not to be able to profit by their efforts, I'm completely in favor of that. But that's not the question I want to ponder today. The question I want to ponder is not whether these things are good or bad for the sports themselves, whether they're good or bad for the athletes. I want to ponder, is this good or bad for the fan? If you're just a fan of college sports, which I have increasingly become. Again, I grew up in New York City. I was not a huge fan of college sports because in New York City you have pro teams in every sport that you care about. I didn't care that much. I went to college in Chicago. I went to school in the Big Ten, and my perspective has slowly but surely changed to where I live and die with the Northwestern games. And then by extension, I have always rooted for the Big Ten. And now, and in my career today, I come to appreciate the urgency of college football. Like, I like how important all these games are. So this matters to me as a fan. I'm not particularly a fan of the SEC. Those aren't my teams. I'm not a fan of a Big 12 team, Texas and Oklahoma. I don't have a horse in that race. I'm just asking, if you're a casual fan like me, who's not going to be directly impacted by this, do you think the way the sport is changing is going to make it better or worse for you as a fan? And my inclination is to say it's going to be worse. I think it is going to be worse because I think that the continued professionalization of the sport, which all three of those things do, the players are now genuinely being compensated financially. That makes them professionals no matter how desperately the NCAA tries to cling to the word amateur. They are professionals. The putting together of these super conferences, you're going to have a league. This is going to be a league now. This is no longer going to be a country that is divided up into different subsections of sports. This is going to be one central league, not so differently than the NFL is, or the NBA is, or Major League Baseball, or any of the other sports are. And then, what was the third one? Oh, the 12 playoff teams. Well, what does that sound like? What exactly does that sound like? So I think the differentiation of collegiate sports from the NFL is going to be blurred. And I think if you are not one who has a horse in the race, if you don't, like I think in the southeastern part of this country where I know we have huge audiences, and I welcome that, I love that, I think this will remain incredibly important because it will not impact your passion for it because this is your whole life. But there are many of us, like myself, who've really come to the party mostly because of the difference, because it's different, because every game feels like there's a championship riding on it, because I get to watch these kids, and they are still somewhere in the back of mind kids who are not getting paid for this stuff, because there are big games in this conference this week and big games in that conference next week, and a team's going to win that one and a team's going to win that one, and you have something to play for even if you're still trying to win the conference championship, and that still means something. And somewhere deep in the recesses of my mind, as an alum of a Big Ten institution, the idea that the Big Ten and the Pac-10, which it'll always be to me, but now the Pac-12, the winners would play each other in the Rose Bowl, which I know doesn't happen anymore, but it's still all kind of in there. And it's all going to be gone now. And I do wonder if for casual fans, all these changes will not, in the long run, be beneficial. They will not fuel more interest in the sport than they otherwise would. That might be a completely naive and ridiculous way of looking at it.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.